October 1st, 2013. Dread Pirate Roberts is sitting alone at the Glen Park Library in San Francisco, typing on his Samsung 700Z laptop. He's chatting with a man who goes by the name Cirrus, whom he believes is an employee of the Silk Road, Dread's anonymous online marketplace. Those sitting around him at the library have no idea they've come into contact with one of the most infamous internet anons of all time. At least, that's what he thinks. The man he's chatting with, Cirrus, is really Jared Diryegan, an agent of the Department of Homeland Security. And he has been infiltrating the Silk Road for several years. He's hiding in a stairwell of the library and asks Dredd to log into the Silk Road's administrative site to take a look at something. And then he gives the signal. Two undercover officers in plain clothing start an argument nearby to distract Dredd, while a third grabs his laptop. Finally, after years of chasing down the elusive Dread Pirate Roberts, they have him. His real name is Ross Ulbricht. Now, before we really get into the story, you may have heard this name before, Ross Ulbricht. If you've stumbled across the libertarian or Bitcoin side of social media, you've likely encountered the campaign for his freedom. And you've probably heard that, spoiler alert, it was successful, and Ross Ulbricht has been fully pardoned by President Donald Trump. And maybe you've come searching for answers. Who is this guy? Is he a dangerous drug kingpin? Did he order a hitman to take out his enemies? Why is he treated like a libertarian messiah? We'll talk about it, and hopefully you'll find the answers you're looking for in this video. Maybe you'll leave with even more questions. As always, you know I have extended reading and sources linked in the description. Now let's get into the story. Ross started the Silk Road website when he was only 26 years old, but before he became the creator of this dark web marketplace, he had a relatively normal life, and to be honest, it seems like he would become fairly successful. Ross was born to Lynn and Kirk Ulbricht in Austin, Texas on March 27th, 1984. He was an outdoorsy and smart kid who became an Eagle Scout before studying physics at the University of Texas and earning a master's degree in material science at the Pennsylvania State University. It was in Pennsylvania where Ross joined a libertarian student group and the Ron Paul campaign. After stumbling up the libertarian rabbit hole, he turned down an offer from Cornell to pursue a PhD and decided to dive deeper into entrepreneurship, the freedom philosophy, and free market economics. It was around this time he started building the Silk Road. In his own words, the idea was to create a website where people could buy anything anonymously, with no trail whatsoever that could lead back to them. It took him a while to build, and according to a journal found on his confiscated laptop, he initially listed mushrooms he was growing out in Bastrop, Texas, to build up some interest in clientele for the website. The Silk Road would allow users to buy and sell pretty much anything, with a little moderation to weed out the fakes and really immoral stuff. It was a slow start at first, but he had a big idea for what was to come. He wrote, "In 2011, I am creating a year of prosperity and power beyond what I have ever experienced before. Silk Road is going to become a phenomenon, and at least one person will tell me about it, unknowing that I was its creator." Okay, manifestation, I see you. And it worked. Over 2011, his site did grow pretty rapidly, to the point where he was getting attention from news sites like Gawker and sitting US senators who, of course, hated the Silk Road and Bitcoin. And if you're in Ross's shoes, that's pretty stressful. You're about to make powerful enemies, and who knows what they're going to do to you. He wrote, "I started to get into a bad state of mind. I was mentally taxed, and now I felt extremely vulnerable and scared. The US government, my main enemy, was aware of me, and some of its members were calling for my destruction. This is the biggest force-wielding organization on the planet." Now, what did he mean by that? A force-wielding organization? Well, in 1918, Max Weber, one of the three founders of sociology, gave a speech about this very topic. He said, "The modern state is a compulsory association which organizes domination. It has been successful in seeking to monopolize the legitimate use of physical force as a means of domination within a territory, and the decisive means for politics is violence. Ross was scared of the violence monopolizer, basically. He feared the loss of his life and liberty should the US federal government crack down on him. Unfortunately, this was not an irrational fear. Over time, the site grew and grew, and Ross had to build a bigger team to manage all of it. He seemed to become overconfident in his ability to protect himself and his employees' identities. There are chat logs where he says the risk is near zero and it'll be very hard for the feds to build a case against him, especially with all the encryptions. Spoiler alert, the feds broke the encryptions. This is why they needed to distract him in that library. The key was getting his laptop while it was still logged in and awake. As soon as the laptop was retrieved that fateful day in October 2013, they spent several hours taking photos of all of it. The chat logs, his diary, everything. Ross's trial became national news. I mean, it's alluring, people. A website where anonymous users can do shady dealings and sell illicit substances. Now, that's drama. And Ross was going to be used as the fall guy for every illegal thing that happened on the platform. Rumors circulated, and part of the trial and Ross's reputation became corrupted through allegations of murder for hire plots. The prosecution brought up these alleged, attempted, but never completed hits on others' lives, but they never tried him for it or proved that they even happened. It was as if they were trying to create this image of a psychopathic dark web kingpin. One of the victims of these alleged murder for hire plots was Curtis Green, an admin of the Silk Road who had been responsible for registering new users on the platform. According to Curtis, one day he received a package at his front door and brought it inside. Little did he know that it was a kilogram of cocaine sent to him by federal agents who wanted to entrap him after discovering his identity as a Silk Road administrator. Curtis Green then gets arrested for the cocaine and tells the police everything he knows about the Silk Road, including giving up the login credentials of some of the major vendors. $500,000 of Bitcoin on the Silk Road is then stolen by these rogue investigators. Then these fallacious feds tell Curtis Green that the Dread Pirate Roberts wants him beat up. So they fake his torture and waterboarding. Then they say that DPR put out a hit on Curtis. So they fake a death scene using a can of red soup, and for the next year, Curtis pretends to be dead and does not leave his house because he thinks Ross Ulbricht is going to kill him. The truth about all of this came to light after Ross's arrest when DEA agent Carl Force and Secret Service vet Sean Bridges were found guilty of stealing all that Bitcoin we mentioned earlier, as well as extortion. I'm just gonna let that marinate for a second. So clearly we're dealing with a very professional, above board investigation here. You can count on the United States federal government for that. Oh, and by the way, there was no mention of any of this at Ross Ulbricht's trial, because of course there wasn't. So Ross was convicted on 7 charges. None of them were violent. None of them had to do with a murder for hire plot or even Ross personally selling drugs. They dealt with money laundering, computer hacking, narcotics distribution, and the infamous Kingpin statute, more officially known as the Continuing Criminal Enterprise statute. The judge gave Ross 2 life sentences plus 40 years, which weirdly enough was 20 more years than the prosecution requested. Huh? So let's just assume that all of these charges were just and that Ross should be held responsible for the way others were using his platform. What's up with that sentence? Like, you mad, bro? I think they were out for blood, and I think they were trying to make an example of Ross. They also declared that Ross owed them $183,961,921. The government wrote, Silk Road automatically laundered all proceeds passing through its Bitcoin-based payment system, including by passing them through a tumbler, whose sole purpose was to obfuscate the source and nature of the funds. Hence, Ulbricht is liable for a money judgment in the amount of all the criminal proceeds laundered through the Silk Road, regardless of the extent he personally retained those funds. Huh? Make that make sense. You mean to tell me money he never made, he's gonna pay out to you? Baby, you look greedy. and delusional. So here we have the government admitting that the problem is the anonymity. And why is that a problem? They can't tax it, and they can't prosecute it if they don't know who's making the moolah. That's the whole case. They went after Ross not because his site was used to buy and sell drugs, because if that was the case, Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, Telegram, WhatsApp, Apple Messages, Facebook, Instagram, all of them would be getting the old Ross Ulbricht treatment. That anonymity of the Silk Road presents a major threat to the government's power, and they don't like that. And so they used Ross as a sacrificial lamb to tell all of us, don't mess with the top dog. Because, like Ross alluded to earlier, they have a monopoly on force, and they will use it. So Ross Ulbricht was condemned to a life in prison. I've spent a lot of time this past week reading the letters Ross wrote to his supporters while locked up. After his sentencing, he still seemed hopeful that this grand injustice would somehow be righted and he'd be back with all of his friends at conferences like PorcFest soon. That's how you know he was a real OG libertarian. Within a few years, however, the tone changed quite dramatically. It was clear that several years in prison, seeing supporters, especially his mom, fight for him on the outside to no avail was really wearing on his spirit. And then he ended up in the hole. According to his website that his mother, Lynn Ulbricht, runs, he refused to assault another prisoner and had to be put in solitary confinement for 4 months for his own safety. Many of his letters from this time are reflections about the unfairness of the justice system. He writes in 2018, "Imagine the worst torture you can think of that doesn't leave the victim disabled. Something you can't deny is cruel. Burning, flogging, take your pick. If the victims themselves would prefer this torture to imprisonment, the inescapable conclusion is that prison is worse, even more cruel. I and every prisoner I have asked would prefer any amount of pain and cruelty for a limited duration to the years and decades we're forced to spend here, spirits crushed, hope abandoned, relegated to irrelevance." But Ross himself would never become irrelevant, thanks to his mom, Lynn Ulbricht. Lynn is pretty famous in our liberty community for her relentless, unwavering advocacy for her son's release. And so the Free Ross movement has been a mainstay of our community and the Bitcoin community for the entire 11 years of his imprisonment, which is pretty impressive. And it was through negotiations and talks between President Trump and the chairwoman of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle, that Trump promised a commutation of Ross Ulbricht sentence day one should he win. And this was a very brave political maneuver from Angela, who faced a lot of criticism from libertarians for allowing Trump a platform at the Libertarian National Convention. But it worked. 36 hours into his presidency, Donald Trump signed a full pardon, not just a commutation, for Ross Ulbricht. And here is a picture of him enjoying his first moments of freedom. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about the case, so please leave a comment, even if you disagree with the conclusions I came to. And as a reminder, I have a lot of further reading and sources linked in the description, so please check those out. I will leave you with a poem Ross wrote during the COVID lockdowns when he was relegated to his cell for 22 to 24 hours a day. "From the light of freedom to a concrete tomb, the fall was great and swift. My soul cried out in a mighty boom, how could it come to this? Clamped down, trapped, stuck, paralyzed in a tiny cage. Had fate left me not a drop of luck? Was there reason for this rage? Told to lay down and die, something deep inside me stirred. I can't be caged, I have to fly. Not yet am I interred. They can take my body, tie me down, it matters not a bit. My spirit still runs wild and free, so in freedom here I sit."